At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Sanjana Lal is Fiji's National Conservator of Forests, and she heads up the Fijian government's Ministry of Forestry department, advocating for sustainable forest stewardship in a country with 61% forest cover and where 80% of the land is owned and inhabited by indigenous communities. I chat to Sanjana about her personal philosophies towards forest stewardship, the challenges and issues Fiji faces today in conserving its vast areas of forest, and why taking a community-centred approach remains absolutely vital to a future-proof mindset. Sanjana, welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I feel really fortunate to be able to talk to you. You're someone that's worked with the forests of Fiji for more than 30 years. So you must have a lot of experience, knowledge and wisdom. Before we go there and I find out more about your insights from this side of the world, could you tell me what trees mean to you personally?
Yes, that's quite a simple question, but difficult as well, because I've worked in forestry for like 30 years, but I grew up in a very well forested area. So for me, the first thing that comes to mind is strength. Like it's such a solid structure with deep roots. So it has this feeling of strength. So when you look at a tree, this is the first image that I get. Secondly, it's like about the past, because I remember the tree at home where we had swings on the tree. My grandfather actually, was playing with us under that tree. Those are the feelings that seeing a tree evokes in me. Apart from the aesthetics, of course, trees are beautiful. I mean, you looked at them with awe, like that's one of the features of the trees, just probably majestic and grand. This is the kind of feelings that trees evoke in me. But yeah, it's all about sentiment, past, even the present, future. Even though I've worked in forestry for 30 years, when I look at trees, I don't think of timber at all. Even now, trees are just like values and a breath of fresh air. You could actually see the environment change. Like from Suva, when you are driving up, as soon as you reach the Suva, the microclimate completely changes. It's just so cool and dense. So yeah, it's sort of like a connection, past, present, future. The older trees are about strength, grandeur, And of course, at the back of my mind, there's always the fact that trees are important to life, water, biodiversity, ecosystem services that they provide, and climate change, resilience, mangroves, for example. So like I said, a lot of my impression of trees are from my childhood.
Do you mind saying a little bit more about where it was exactly that you said it was a forested area?
The first half of my life was in Tovata, which is a place in Nasinu. And at that time, there was no development at all. There was just probably only 3 houses. And then there's all these trees up there. Actually, amazingly, the forestry department planted mahogany trees. So the bus route that I used to take, we used to pass those mahogany trees. And you see all sorts of birds and insects around the trees. So we used to, especially the millipedes. And when we used to pass those trees, it was just so beautiful. I mean, most of my holidays were spent in Waila. And we had these really old trees there. Majestic, just so beautiful. We used to play under those trees with my grandparents. So, those are the things which we used to do when we did not have mobiles and TV. The best part of our lives was spent there.
And now you're head conservator, the lead for the forests of Fiji.
I was never meant to be a forester. I was meant to be a doctor. I got a scholarship to do medicine, which I was always working towards.
Yeah.
And then I think I got sick. Too much coffee, staying awake, not eating properly, too much ice cubes during my exams, hospitalized for 3 months. That's when I thought, okay, I can't become a human doctor, let me become a tree doctor. Applied for it, got it, and then I just loved it since then.
That's it. No turning back.
Yeah, it was really, I think it was meant to be. That's how I always felt it. It took me to be hospitalized to change my mind.
I wonder if you'd mind me asking you, as a woman in a male-dominated industry and sector, which is the same in the UK, by the way, and many other places around the world, and someone of Indo-Fijian heritage, you perhaps represent someone from a background that wouldn't typically work in the sector, and I think that's a real positive thing. Would you mind speaking a little about how that's been for you in your 30 years and, yeah, how you feel about that?
When I came in, I think there were just few ladies in the ministry. And once I got well established, those ladies left. So at one point of time, I probably was the only female in the ministry. But just because I've worked in forestry my whole life, there's two things I've never faced. I've never faced any discrimination. Everyone is trying to fight for women having power positions. In the Ministry of Forestry, I've never for once, I didn't feel there was any prejudice, but I worked with mostly older men. And there's one very good quality about Fijian men is that they're very courteous towards women and helpful. And I joined in as a laborer, and where I have to cut my way through the forest. And they'd be offering to hold my bag for me or cut the path for me. And they were so helpful. So even when I was at the very lowest grade in the ministry as a worker, till now when I'm the Conservator of Forests, I've had that respect. I think it's, like I said, it's the culture that I've seen in the Ministry of Forestry really standing out. It's not only me, but people from other ministries are also very, they comment on the fact that we are so different in the Ministry of Forestry. And I guess it's people who have grown up in forests with that culture, with that background. So I think it's the forestry culture where you don't feel, discriminated or prejudiced against. And even when I go to meetings like Foresters Association meetings in Australia, we sort of all, have the same mindset over there. When you stand under a big tree, you have this humbleness like that you look up to that tree, you
Yes.
feel this humbleness inside.
Yeah.
I haven't really found it challenging, but like with my other roles as a mother, then traveling became sometimes a bit of an issue. I've done my fair share of camping and doing all the hard work that any forester normally does. Compared to now, where you have sleeping bags, when we started off, we had none of those. We had to take tarpaulins and just look for some poles and put another tarpaulin on top, and then just put a mat and sleep. We used the river as our, for cooking, for washing, for bathing, for everything. And we stayed for like a week in the forests. We started on a Monday with all these fresh fish, and by Friday our fish is really hard because we keep them on the campfire, So like those are experiences that I've had. There have been difficulty being a woman, especially going out in the bush with no toilets and all those facilities. I grew up in a Fijian community in Tovata, and I sort of understood the language. I spoke the language. I grew up in that culture, and I think the respect came out of that because I was a Christian. So I sort of like connected with them well right from the beginning. So race was never an issue for me. And gender, I guess I never thought of myself as being in a male dominated field. I was just like, oh, I'm just one of them. So, I think it's also a person's mindset, how well you adapt yourself. If you keep thinking I'm a woman, and I don't fit in here, then of course that's right from the beginning you got it wrong, you know. It's just go with the flow. Mm.
I'm wondering, from your point of view, what you think best practice forest stewardship looks like in Fiji, and perhaps what are some of the challenges that you are facing, and how should we be approaching those?
As foresters, we are told that we are stewards of forests, but I really think that the real stewards of forests are the forest owners. 80% of the land is owned by the indigenous Fijians. So I would say the stewards of forests would be communities. And one really important aspect is ownership, having this sense that this belongs to me and I need to manage it. And an awareness and education about forests, the importance of forests, which has been done well in the past. I mean, everyone wants to conserve forests. I mean, there have been financial constraints. We have communities that are dependent on forests, and they have to actually harvest forests. So I think stewardship for forests, it's more about the people, not really a ministry, as in Ministry of Forestry. We are there to facilitate education awareness, but in the end, it's the communities themselves that we depend on. And our messaging should be one that is able to evoke that sense of responsibility from every individual who lives or who owns forests.
You must have a really good understanding of the different cultural beliefs that play into protection.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things in the UK that I think we struggle with. We have quite an intellectual way of looking at forests and trees and how they're looked after. I would say that my short time in Fiji has shown me that here there are more spiritual, sacred, holistic beliefs about the living world and land generally. Mm-hmm. So how are those relevant in the work that you do?
I mean, when we first visit communities, we pay our respects to the elders. And then the first thing they say is, my name is so-and-so. This is my tree. This is my animal. That's how we introduce ourselves. That's a Fijian way of introduction. So each community or each vanua has a way of introducing, or they have a special tree. So automatically that tree becomes special to them. This is our totem tree. That's what they call it. From the kids right up to the older generation, they all know and appreciate the fact that this is our totem tree and we need to have it around us. So it has to be there because that's their link. And I'm sure that people who live outside those rural areas, if they were given an opportunity to plant their totem tree on their own land, even in the urban and peri-urban areas, they would really appreciate it.
Let's talk a little bit then about planting and those special species that you mentioned. So those really play into people's sense of identity in Fiji. There are also trees that are endemic to Fiji as well, partly because of its geographic remoteness as well, and the fact that it's a few hundred islands.
Yeah.
That means that there are trees that don't grow anywhere else, that have evolved in isolation. And then linked to that as well, you know, in our international community, you'd have things like IUCN threatened species as well. And some of those overlap as well. So with the focus on planting new trees and actually an appetite for that, how are those really significant species that we might be losing built into those plans?
Well, you must be aware that the Ministry of Forestry has its initiative 30 million trees in 15 years. The main aim of that program is to actually restore degraded areas. But somehow or the other, from 2019, when this initiative originally started, lessons learned, we realized that it's not only about restoration of degraded areas, it's about bringing back biodiversity, starting to conserve species that are difficult to grow. As you mentioned, 23% of our trees are endemic to Fiji. And there's special trees which are quite primitive. And one of the most primitive trees we have is the Ecmopyle seniana. It's called draw tambua in Fijian because the leaves are shaped like the tambua, the whale's tooth tambua. And it has actually just been grown in an area in the highlands. But out of all the foresters, only one managed to actually grow that tree in the nursery. It was very difficult to grow. Another species is Digenaria vithiensis, is quite small in population. Siratu. It's one of those evolutionary trees as well. They may not be as important for timber, but they have these qualities, these features that they are linked to the past in some way. And if we don't protect the habitats, we'll probably lose them. So we're trying to plant them in forest reserves, which are under protection. Development will always happen and no one can stop development. Countries are supposed to be progressing, but just to ensure that we conserve those trees and not lose them. Like, a lot of countries' developments have led them to extinction in some countries.
Part of what appealed to me when I knew I was going to come to Fiji was that you still have intact rainforest. What kind of percentage of Fiji's land is old growth forest? And secondly, why are they so important?
Yeah, as you know, 61% of Fiji is forested, 61% of the land. That includes both planted forests and native forests, and also degraded forests, meaning that there were trees before and now they have remnants. There's very few areas in Fiji which have pristine forests. And mainly the reason that they have remained untouched is because they have been under preservation under the Forest Act. So communities know that it's a no-go zone. And the other thing was that they are on very steep slopes. So mostly the remnant forests are in these very steep areas or areas where there's no access. We haven't actually done any approximate calculation of how much is pristine forest. I would say not much compared to the total 61% of land area that is forested.
Something I've been studying here with the help of the people I've met is where there might still be really big old trees. And it seems that actually a lot of those will have been selectively logged at some point.
Mm-hmm.
There are still some out there as well. And I think they're probably in some of the areas you've just mentioned, in the pristine places where access has not been so good. So it's never been possible to remove that tree. Therefore, it's still there. And those trees are really important for wildlife and particularly some of the bird life as well, like your parrots, for example, that live in the holes that they nest in old trees. Mm-hmm. And those trees as well, in an ecosystem sense, provide so much in terms of stability, continuity. What are your thoughts on that habitat value of those old trees that we do still have here?
We find them mostly in village settings. And towards dawn, you can hear all the birds that come and, nest in it in the night. And yeah, there's a hive of activity, especially when you are camping in the forest. You can hear all these birds and insects that are within the forest. The highlands in Nathasiri, they have huge dakua and kaugula species. They are very big trees. And fortunately, there hasn't been any access there to these places. We are trying to get communities to preserve those areas rather than forfeit value that those trees are worth. It's sort of changing mindsets, trying to get them to preserve them. So there are quite big trees in the forest. Even when we go for harvesting in forest areas, there's a harvesting code which allows for trees that are old growth trees or trees that are seed sources to be left untouched. So we do allow for that. But there's these massive trees in some of these areas, really beautiful. There's individual trees which have provided this habitat, which are still providing. If you look at Western Gardens, there's these trees around 5, 6 p.m. You can see all the flock of birds coming to these trees. So they have individual trees and we have forests offering habitat for this diversity of insects and birds.
Yeah, in Fiji, plants and trees grow fast. Compared to the UK, the temperate climate I'm used to, being in a tropical environment, you really see that. It's perhaps why you might have so many different species competing. And it's turned on its head a little bit my kind of understanding of what forest management looks like in the UK, because we are all about trying to keep lots of open areas to allow light in, because our wildlife tends to do best in the edges between open habitat and high forest and everything in between that. In Fiji, actually shade seems to be the biggest factor. So when you get a closed canopy forest, the richest forests for wildlife here, the ones with a really great mixture of different species, providing different niches in terms of their buds, their flowers, their sap perhaps, loads of different microhabitats. For example, I've learnt about a bat here that depends totally on one particular tree. I think it's the Kanuga tree. That flower only opens for one night only, and the bats come and basically they're pollinators for that. And because of that fast growth rate, it means that invasive species can take over quite quickly as well. And so I've seen like the African tulip tree here. It's actually taken over vast areas where there has been land clearances, got bright red flowers. It's almost like an indicator that these areas have been managed in quite a drastic way. Mm-hmm. And then I've also heard about a plant that the American forces brought in World War II as a camouflage. And I think that's now climbing over many of the trees and sort of strangling them and their canopies so they can't grow so easily. So yeah, quite a lot of challenges to manage. How do you prioritize these things?
From the beginning, your question was about trees growing quite fast in Fiji. Native trees, when you try to grow them, they grow slower than introduced species. For example, pine and mahogany, these are the two species that were introduced, and that was to meet our timber needs. The vision at that time was that Fiji has got a lot of endemic species. The idea was to try and conserve native forests, and the timber needs to be met by hardwood and softwood, mahogany and pine. What we're trying to do is, firstly, is trying to conserve native trees, restore degraded areas, trying to sustainably manage our natural forests, and also trying to replant plantation forests. So basically, we have a set area of plantation forests, and we will have them remain as plantation forests. We're not going to change that. We will probably not extend plantation forest. We'll keep them there as it is, because that is sufficient for our domestic needs as well as for exports. And then these invasive species that we mentioned that comes after clearing of forests. Managing them, probably the best way we would do it now is manually, because a lot of these African tulips are along waterways, and it's difficult to go in there with your harvesting machines and clear them. We have this company, the bioenergy company. They have started buying African tulips for their power plant. They use it as fuel to generate power. When you say prioritizing, really, I think we have to look at both the socioeconomic as well as the environmental aspects. Also, bringing in climate smart agriculture and changing mindsets of people. So we have to align our work and our priorities around the community needs, mostly.
What other countries have you worked with in forestry?
Actually, I've visited which I continue to have contact with: Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Japan. Japan was more like a friendship tour, but I love the trees there. They are so beautiful. Yeah, India. Which country did I miss? I've been to New York, and it's quite artificial, but yeah, it looks nice too. They have nice trees there as well. And of course, Australia and New Zealand.
We're coming towards the end of the interview. What a great chat we've just had. I'm really grateful for your time. And when it comes to trees and forests, what would you like people to think about?
One message I would probably have for people, as far as trees and forests are concerned, I think not only for Fiji, the Pacific, but the whole world, I think there should be a revival of the value of trees, because over time people sort of lose the value of trees over time. So we sort of changed the storyline to climate change, to carbon. Then just go back to the basics. What are trees? What do they do? What do they provide? The paper you write on, the cereal box that you have in the morning, those trees, the water you drink. None of us think of trees. But when you drink a glass of water, you would know definitely that it's because of the forest that you're having a fresh, clean glass of water. Can you live without trees?
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And see you next time.